Welcome to Gurukul Live Lectures. In the ongoing series of corporate governance, today we are going to talk on the different committees on this, the Birla Committee and the Kotak Committee. The corporate governance refers to a system of rules, practices and the process by which a company is directed and controlled. And in India, the corporate governance has gained a significant importance over the past few decades, evolving in response to economic liberalization, corporate scandals, and the need for a greater transparency and accountability in the business sector. Let's see the overview of the corporate governance landscape in India. The corporate governance landscape in India is shaped by a combination of the legal framework, regulatory bodies, and the voluntary guidelines. The Companies Act 2013 is the cornerstone of the corporate governance legislation in India, providing a comprehensive legal framework for the governance of the companies. Alongside this, the Security Exchange Board of India, SEBI, plays a very crucial role in enforcing the governance standards, especially for the listed companies. Historically, the corporate governance in India was relatively underdeveloped, with a focus on family-owned business and a lack of stringent regulatory oversight. However, with the liberalization of the Indian economy in the early 1990s, the need for a robust corporate governance mechanism became evident. The opening up of the economy brought an influx of the foreign investments, and with it the demand for the higher standards of the corporate governance. The Indian companies began to recognize the importance of a good governance practices to attract the global investors, enhance their reputation, and improve the overall business performance. This recognition led to the several reforms and the establishment of the committees tasked with improving the corporate governance standards in the country. Now, let us see the rationale behind forming the Birla and the Kotak Committee. Let us discuss first the Birla Committee in 1999. The first major step towards formalizing the corporate governance standards in India was the formation of the Birla Committee in 1999, chaired by Kumar Mangalam Birla. The primary objective of the Birla Committee was to recommend the ways to improve the corporate governance standards among the Indian companies, particularly those listed on the stock exchanges. The Birla Committee was established in response to growing concerns about the lack of the transparency, accountability in the Indian business. At the time, the corporate governance practices in India were largely informal with a limited regulatory oversight. The committee was tasked with creating a framework that would bring the Indian corporate governance practices in line with the global standards. There are some key recommendations of the Birla Committee included in the introduction of independent directors on the company board, the establishment of audit committee, and the separation of the roles of the chairman and the CEO. The committee also emphasized the importance of the financial disclosures and the need for the greater transparency in the corporate affairs. Now, these recommendations laid the foundation for the subsequent corporate governance reforms in India. In the committee, almost 2 decades after the Birla Committee, the Kotak Committee the corporate governance was formed in the year 2017 under the chairmanship of Uday Kotak. The rationale behind the formation of the Kotak Committee was further to strengthen the corporate governance standards in India in the light of evolving the business practices and the global trends. So, by 2017, the Indian corporate sector had undergone the significant changes with the increased globalization, technological advancements, and a more complex business environment. There was a growing recognition that existing corporate governance norms needed to be updated to address these challenges and align with the international best practices. The Kotak Committee was tasked with reviewing and recommending the changes to the SEBI regulations on the corporate governance for the listed companies. Its mandate included enhancing the effectiveness of the board process, improving the quality of disclosures, and addressing the issues related to the board of independence and accountability. There are some key recommendations of the Kotak committee included the stricter criteria for the independence of directors, increased transparency in related party transactions, enhanced roles and responsibility of audit committee, and the introduction of more rigorous corporate governance norms for the large companies. Now, these recommendations were aimed at ensuring that the Indian companies could compete on a global stage while managing the trust of their stakeholders. The Birla Committee, formerly known as the Kumar Mangalam Birla Committee, was established by SEBI in 1999. The primary goal of the committee was to improve the corporate governance standards in India, and let's see the key recommendations which were made by the Birla Committee. The first and the foremost is the Board of Directors composition. The committee recommended that the Board of Directors of a company should have an optimum combination of executive and non-executive directors, with not less than 50% of the board comprising of the non-executive directors. For a company with an executive chairman, at least half of the board should consist of the independent directors. Now comes the independent directors. The committee emphasized the role of independent directors in enhancing the governance. It recommended a definition for the independent director and proposed that they should constitute a significant part of the board. The next is your audit committee. Every company should have an audit committee constituting of at least 3 directors, with the majority being independent. The next is your role. The audit committee was tasked with the oversight of financial reporting, compliance with the regulatory requirement, and ensuring that the adequacy of the internal control. The committee was empowered to investigate any matter within its terms of the reference and had access to all information and the power to obtain the external professional advice. The next is your shareholder rights. The annual general meetings, AGMs. The committee recommended that AGMs be more participative with a greater transparency in communicating important resolution and allowing the shareholder to voice their concerns effectively. The next is your disclosures. The company should make a timely and accurate disclosures regarding the financial performance and the key matters. This includes the quarterly results and the segment-wise revenue, profitability, and the capital employed information. The risk management. The next is your internal control. The committee highlighted the importance of strong internal control to manage the risk effectively. It recommended that the companies establish a system for risk assessment and the management. Financial reporting. The committee emphasized the need of accuracy and transparency in financial reporting, ensuring that all material information is disclosed to the stakeholders. The corporate governance practices, the code of conduct. The committee recommended that the companies adopt a formal code of conduct for the directors and the senior management. The board committees. In addition to the audit committee, the committee suggested the forming the other committees such as the remuneration committee and the shareholder grievance committee to improve the governance practices. Now coming on to the compliance with the accounting standards. The committee urged the companies to strictly comply with the accounting standards and recommendation, the regular audits to ensure the accuracy in the financial statements. The nominee director. The Birla Committee recommended that the nominee director, for example, those appointed by the financial institution, should be treated on par with the independent director and should not be considered the representatives of the institution that appointed them. The next is your role of SEBI. The Security Exchange Board of India was advised to enforce these recommendations and ensure that the companies adhere to the norms of the corporate governance. The next is your periodic review. The committee periodicity review and the update the corporate governance standards to keep pace with the evolving governance practices. The next is your training for directors. The committee recommended that the companies arrange the training program for the directors to update them on the emerging trends in the corporate governance and the regulatory environment. The institutional investors. The role of the institutional investors was emphasized with the recommendation that they would actively participate in the governance process and the decisions. The impact of the Birla Committee recommendations. The recommendations of the Birla Committee had a significant impact on the corporate governance landscape in India. They laid the foundation for more rigorous governance standards and the practices, which was later incorporated into the listing agreement by SEBI and further strengthened by the subsequent committees, such as Naresh Chandra Committee and the Narayan Murthy Committee. The recommendations helped increase the transparency, accountability and the overall quality of the governance in Indian companies, aligning them more closely with the global best practices. The Kotak Committee on the corporate governance, established by the Security Exchange Board of India in the year 2017, was basically tasked with making of the recommendations to enhance the standards of the corporate governance in India. The committee was chaired by Uday Kotak, the CEO of Kotak Mahindra Bank. Here are some key findings and recommendations of the Kotak Committee. The first is your Board of Directors, composition and the independence. The committee recommended that at least half of the board members should be independent directors in the large companies, and it also suggested that the independent directors should not serve more than 3 terms of 5 years each. The separation of the role of the chairperson and the CEO managing director should be separated to ensure the balance of the power and increase the accountability. The Audit Committee. The committee suggested enhancing the role of the Audit Committee by increasing its responsibility in overseeing the financial reporting, internal control and the audit functions. The Nomination and the Remuneration Committee. It was recommended that the committee should be more involved in setting the remuneration of the directors and the key management personnel to ensure the transparency. The board diversity. The gender diversity. The committee recommended that at least one independent woman director should be on the board of large companies to promote the gender diversity. The skill and the competence. The board should have the directors with diverse skills and competencies to ensure the effective decision making. Transparency and disclosure. Enhanced disclosure. The companies should provide more detailed disclosures about the related party transactions, accounting policies and the corporate social responsibility activities. The next is your annual report. The committee recommended that the annual report should include a very clear and a comprehensive discussion on the corporate governance, risk management and the internal control practices. The role of promoters. The committee discussed the potential conflict of interest between the promoters and the minority shareholders and suggested the measures to protect the minority shareholders' interest, including the enhanced disclosures and the stricter approval process for the related party transactions. The corporate governance in subsidiaries. The committee emphasized the importance of the corporate governance practices being extended to the subsidiaries, especially in the cases where the subsidiaries are the material to the parent company's operations. The regulatory framework. Strengthening the regulatory environment. The committee recommended that the Security Exchange Board of India should have a stronger enforcement power to enforce compliance with the corporate governance norms. The periodic reviews. It was suggested, as far as the Kotak Committee on the Corporate Governance is concerned, that the norms should have the periodically reviewed and updated to keep the pace with the changing, dynamic business environment. Now we talk about the compensation of the board members. The committee proposed that the remuneration of the independent directors should be aligned with their performance and the involvement in the company, suggesting a big shift from a fixed to a variable pay based on the company performance. The stakeholder engagement. The committee highlighted the need for a better engagement between the companies and their stakeholders, particularly the institutional investors, to ensure that the shareholders' interests are adequately represented. The risk management. The risk management framework. The committee recommended that the companies should establish a robust risk management framework to identify, assess and mitigate the risk effectively. So, the recommendations of the Kotak committee were aimed at enhancing the corporate governance standards in India, increasing the transparency, protecting the interest of the minority shareholders, promoting the ethical business practices, and the Security Exchange Board of India adopted many of these recommendations, leading to a significant changes in the corporate governance landscape in India. So, let us see the importance of an independent director in the corporate governance. The independent director, they definitely play a very key and a crucial role in the corporate governance, contributing to an overall health and integrity of an organization. Let us see why they are important. The first and the foremost is unbiased decision making. The independent directors are not a part of the company's day-to-day management and are usually have no material relationship with the company. This detachment allows them to provide a very objective oversight on the management decisions, reducing the potential conflict of interest. The next is your accountability. They ensure that the company's management is held accountable for its action, protecting the interest of the shareholders, particularly minority shareholders, enhancing the corporate credibility. The presence of independent director often boosts the investor confidence as it signals that the company is committed to a good governance practices, and this can actually positively impact the company's reputation and of course the valuation. The compliance with the regulations. Many jurisdictions, they require a certain number of independent directors on the board of comply with the corporate governance norms, especially for publicly listed companies. This ensures that the company adheres to a legal and a regulatory requirement. The checks and the balances. Independent directors serve as a counterbalance to the power of CEO and other executive directors. They can challenge the decisions that might not align with the company's long-term interest, thereby ensuring that the power is not overly concentrated in the fewer hands. The next important aspect relating to the independent director in the corporate governance is the mitigating risk. By questioning and scrutinizing the management strategies and the practices, independent director help identify, mitigate the risk that might otherwise go unnoticed. The expertise and the experience, that is the diverse perspective. The independent director often bring a wealth of the experience from the different industries and the sectors. This diversity of thought can actually lead to a more innovative and well-rounded decision making. Specialized knowledge. They can offer a specialized knowledge in the areas such as finance, law and the industry specific expertise. which can be invaluable in guiding the company through a complex challenges. Now coming on to the ethical governance, promoting the ethical practices. Independent directors are actually often seen as the guardians of the ethical standards within the company. They can play a very pivotal key role in setting the tone at the top, ensuring that the company operates with the integrity. The next important aspect is your whistleblower protection. They can provide an additional layer of the protection for the whistleblowers, ensuring that the concerns about the unethical practices are addressed appropriately without the fear of retaliation. The strategic guidance, the long-term focus. Independent directors are often instrumental in helping the board maintain a strong term strategic focus, ensuring that the short-term gains do not compromise the company's future. The successful planning. They can actually play a very key role in succession planning for a senior management, ensuring a continuity and the stability in the leadership. So hence we can say that the independent directors are essential for maintaining the balance, integrity, long-term success of the company. Their presence on the board enhancing the corporate governance by providing the impartial oversight, ensuring a compliance and bringing a valuable expertise and ethical standards to the table. Improving a board evaluation practices is very essential for enhancing the effectiveness of a company's governance structure. Effective board evaluation, it helps ensuring the board of directors in functioning optimally and that its members are contributing positively to the company's success. So, let's talk about several strategies definitely to improve the board of evaluation practices. We need to adapt a structured and a regular evaluation process. We need to implement an annual evaluation process to assess the board performance regularly. This consistency helps identify the trends and the areas of improvement over time. So, there has to be improvement in the board evaluation practices which have to be implemented to a substantial extent to improve the functioning and the corporate governance practices in India. Like we talked about, improving the board evaluation practices is key for the corporate structure. It basically helps the board of directors in functioning optimally and they also contribute positively to the company's success. And definitely there are so many ways and means to do and improve the board evaluation practices. Thank you so much.